The wind carried dust through the cracked windows of the Morales ranch house as Anna stood by the old wooden table, her fingers tracing the faded ink on the debt notice that spelled the death of everything her family had worked for. Her mother, Doña Rosa, coughed softly in the next room, a sound that seemed to echo through the walls and into Anna's bones. Outside, the corral stood half empty, the cattle already sold to feed men she would never meet. When the carriage arrived, a glossy black thing that looked wrong against the sunburnt land, Anna did not look out. She already knew who had sent it. Henry Whitlock's name had been whispered for months. A railroad baron old enough to be her grandfather, wealthy enough to buy half of New Mexico, cruel enough to do it. His offer had come through a lawyer, marriage for debt forgiveness, property secured in writing, the Morales name preserved only if she agreed. Her mother had cried, prayed, and then whispered, "Misha, I'll die if you don't." And so Anna, dressed in her best cotton skirt, packed nothing but her rosary and the deed to land that no longer belonged to her, and climbed into the carriage before the sun could see her tears. The road to Santa Fe was long and silent, broken only by the whistle of the new railroad that carved through the desert like a scar. She looked at it with hatred and fear. It was Whitlock's doing, the same steel that had drained her family's wells and stolen their buyers. As she entered the city, the air shifted. Perfume and coal smoke replaced the smell of sage and earth. People watched as the carriage stopped before a white-columned mansion. The door opened, and Henry Whitlock stood waiting, a tall, thin man in a black suit that hung on him like a skeleton's robe, his eyes pale and sharp. He smiled, not kindly. "You'll do," he said, as if purchasing livestock. Anna's heart went still, but her chin did not drop. "Then let's be done with it," she answered, her voice steady enough to startle even him. The wedding was arranged for the following day, to be held in the parlor before witnesses more loyal to power than faith. As night fell, Anna stood by the window of her guest room, watching her mother's carriage disappear down the hill toward home. She pressed her hand against the glass until it fogged with her breath, and whispered, "Mama, I'll buy our freedom with my name." Downstairs, the baron's servants were already preparing the champagne for tomorrow's ceremony, and the sound of their laughter rose like mockery. In that moment, Anna understood what kind of cage she had chosen, but she also felt, deep inside, that she would not die in it. Not quietly, not as his property. The morning sun over Santa Fe burned white against the adobe walls, but inside the Whitlock mansion everything was gray. Muted silk, marble floors, the ticking of a grandfather clock that seemed louder than the vows themselves. Anna stood at the altar in a pale dress that wasn't hers, hands clasped before a crowd of strangers who whispered behind gloved fingers. The preacher's voice wavered as he read the lines, glancing up at the old man beside her who barely breathed between phrases. Henry Whitlock's hand trembled when he placed the ring on her finger, not from nerves but from age, from the weight of a lifetime that should have ended before he ever met her. "Do you take this man?" the preacher asked. "For better or worse?" Anna's throat tightened, but she nodded. It was not love, not even duty. It was the only way to keep her mother alive. When the crowd clapped, it sounded like rain on tin, sharp and hollow. Eleanor Whitlock, the baron's widowed daughter-in-law, leaned toward a friend and said, "She'll be gone before spring, like all his toys." Anna heard it, and so did Samuel, who had just arrived from Boston, still in his traveling coat, standing at the back of the room. His eyes met hers for a fleeting second. Calm, assessing, not cruel. Then he turned away, as if unsure why he'd come. The reception was a blur of toasts and false congratulations. The Baron bragged about rail lines stretching from Texas to the mountains, while Anna stood beside him, nodding at guests who looked through her. When the photographer asked them to pose, Henry gripped her waist too tightly, and she forced a smile that hurt more than the pressure on her ribs. By dusk, the crowd had thinned. Carriages rattling away toward town. Servants cleared the silver trays. The air smelled of wilted roses and champagne. Henry dismissed everyone and told Anna to meet him upstairs. Her steps were slow on the velvet-lined staircase, every creak of the wood reminding her she was climbing into a life she didn't want. In the bedroom, candles flickered across portraits of dead Whitlocks. The old man poured himself brandy and laughed. "You're quieter than I expected," he said. Anna didn't answer. Her heart thudded so hard she thought it would echo through the walls. When she finally turned to face him, he lifted the glass, grinned, and then the color drained from his face. The brandy spilled down his shirt as his body seized. The glass shattered, rolling across the carpet toward her feet. Anna froze. "Mr. Whitlock," she whispered, stepping forward. But he was already falling. She caught his shoulder too late. His head struck the arm of the chair, eyes wide open but empty. The sound of the crash brought servants running. In the chaos, Samuel appeared again, coat unbuttoned, eyes wide. He knelt beside his father, checking for breath, then looked up at Anna. She was trembling, not from fear of death, but from the terrible knowledge that the bargain she made had just ended, and no one would believe she hadn't planned it. By morning, the Whitlock mansion had turned from a home into a courthouse. Servants whispered in corners, reporters gathered by the gate, and the family lawyer sat in the parlor like a vulture waiting for meat to cool. Anna sat alone at the edge of the long dining table, her wedding dress traded for a borrowed shawl, her face pale from sleeplessness. The doctor had already declared Henry Whitlock dead. Stroke, sudden and final, but gossip needed no proof. Eleanor paced near the fireplace, her pearls clinking as she spoke loud enough for the staff to hear. "A girl half his age, no kin, no fortune, and he dies within hours? I call it convenient." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Anna said nothing. She had learned early that silence was safer than truth when no one wanted to hear it. The sheriff arrived by noon. Polite but cautious, asking questions with the tone of a man who already had an answer. "You didn't leave his side last night?" "No," Anna replied. "He told me to wait upstairs." The sheriff nodded, wrote something down, and left with a look she couldn't read. Samuel watched all of it from the study doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight. He had not spoken to her since the night before, only observed, as if trying to see where guilt began and grief ended. The undertakers came at dusk. The house fell quiet, except for the dragging of the coffin down the hall. When it was over, Eleanor approached Anna with a folded newspaper. "You've made the front page," she said, tossing it onto the table. The headline screamed, "Railroad magnate dies on wedding night. Bride's past in question." Beneath it, Anna's photograph, eyes wide, mouth half open as if caught between confession and plea. "You'll be gone by morning," Eleanor added. "Father's will is clear. Only legitimate heirs inherit. That's us." Anna looked up slowly, her voice calm despite the tremor beneath it. "If the will is clear, then why are you afraid?" Eleanor flushed, turned on her heel, and left the room. Samuel stayed behind. "You didn't love him?" he said quietly. "No," Anna replied, "but I didn't kill him either." Their eyes met, and for the first time he didn't look away. "Then stay," he said after a moment. "At least until the lawyers sort this out." Anna almost laughed, not cruelly, but with the kind of disbelief that follows exhaustion. "You think your family will allow that?" Samuel glanced at the parlor doors where Eleanor's voice still echoed. "They won't," he said. But I will. Outside. Thunder rolled low over the desert, and the lamps in the hall flickered. For the first time since she'd arrived, Anna felt something other than fear. A strange, quiet curiosity about the man who stood against his own blood for someone the world had already condemned. The reading of the will drew more people than the funeral. The Whitlock mansion filled with polished shoes and sharpened tongues, every relative, banker, and newspaperman elbowing for a place near the mahogany desk, where the family lawyer spread out his papers like a map of war. Anna sat near the window, hands folded in her lap, head high despite the eyes burning into her. Samuel stood a few steps behind her, expression unreadable. The lawyer cleared his throat and began, dry legal words tumbling into the heavy air. Properties divided, bonds distributed, debts settled. When her name was finally spoken, the room stiffened. To Mrs. Anna Whitlock, widow of the deceased, the sum of $3,000 and full rights to the Morales homestead as repayment of marital commitment. The room erupted. Eleanor shot to her feet, voice slicing through the murmurs. Repayment! She's been paid enough by the headlines! Laughter scattered through the crowd. The lawyer banged his hand for order, but no one listened. Someone muttered, "She planned it." Another said, "Poison in a kiss." Anna didn't flinch, didn't blink, only fixed her gaze on the window, on the light that stretched across the desert outside as if it wanted to reach her but couldn't. When the lawyer dismissed the meeting, Eleanor swept toward her, perfume sharp, words sharper. "You can keep your money," she hissed, "but not your dignity. Santa Fe will eat you alive." Anna stood slowly, looked her in the eye, and said, "Then it'll choke on me first." The crowd went silent. No one expected her voice to carry that kind of steel. Samuel stepped forward, laying his hat on the desk. "That's enough," he said. "My father's choices were his own. She owes you nothing." The room shifted, shocked to hear a Whitlock defend her. Eleanor's smile thinned. "And what do you owe her, Samuel? Pity." He didn't answer, and that silence said more than words could. The lawyer closed his briefcase, eyes darting between them, already thinking of tomorrow's headlines. When the guests left, the house felt emptier than ever. Quiet, except for the ticking of that same clock that had counted through the vows. Anna walked out to the porch, the desert wind tugging her hair loose. Behind her, Samuel joined her, hands in his coat pockets. "You should leave the city," he said softly. "Go home, before they ruin you." She turned toward him. "I can't. That land isn't mine yet." He hesitated. "You're not fighting for the land anymore." "No," she said, looking past the horizon. "I'm fighting for my name." He nodded once, as if he finally understood. Inside, Eleanor watched them from behind the curtains, her smile fading into calculation. 2 days after the will's reading, the Whitlock estate was already half-packed for scandal. Trunks slammed, lawyers barked orders, and Eleanor dictated statements to the press about her devotion to father's memory. Only Samuel seemed untouched by the storm. He spent his mornings in the study that had been his father's, its walls lined with ledgers that smelled of dust and deceit. When Anna passed the open doorway one afternoon, she paused to find him standing before a shelf, sleeves rolled up, pencil behind his ear, a quiet focus in his eyes that made the chaos beyond the walls seem far away. He didn't notice her at first. "You're searching for something," she said finally, her voice low. He looked up, startled but not annoyed. "Answers," he replied. "My father's fortune didn't build itself. And your land didn't just vanish." She stepped inside, the air thick with paper and pipe smoke. "You think he—" "I don't know," he interrupted. "But I intend to." On the desk lay stacks of contracts bearing the Whitlock seal, rail extensions, land acquisitions, loan agreements with ranchers who'd lost everything. Anna's eyes fell on a familiar signature, Morales, her father's. Her breath caught. Samuel followed her gaze and froze. "He signed away water rights 5 years ago," Samuel murmured, reading the page, "at interest rates that would drown anyone." He flipped through the ledger, page after page, each one worse. "He loaned your family money through an intermediary, his own company under another name." He closed the book slowly, jaw hardening. "He trapped you." Anna stared at him, her mind spinning between disbelief and fury. "Then the marriage was business," Samuel finished quietly. "He meant to buy you the way he bought every mile of track." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, a train whistle echoed across the valley, distant but relentless, like a memory refusing to die. Anna's hands trembled, not from weakness but from rage too deep for tears. "Then why show me this?" she asked. "It ruins your father's name." Samuel looked at her with something that wasn't pity. "Because truth doesn't care about names," he said, "and I won't build my life on his lies." He gathered the ledgers and tied them with twine, sealing a decision neither could undo. "I'll take these to the courthouse tomorrow. Let them see what kind of man they buried." Anna wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. She only nodded. Knowing this quiet man had just set himself against his entire bloodline. As she left the study, Eleanor's voice echoed faintly from the hall below, laughing with guests about the poor girl playing widow. Anna looked towards the staircase and whispered, "Let them laugh." Samuel, still in the study, heard her and smiled for the first time since he'd returned to Santa Fe. The courthouse smelled of dust, sweat, and ink, the scent of judgment. And as Anna stepped inside behind Samuel, she felt every eye in Santa Fe turn toward her like a rifle sight. The benches were filled with townsfolk who had come not for justice but for spectacle. Whispers rippled through the gallery as Eleanor swept in wearing widow's black, flanked by her lawyer and 2 newspapermen already scribbling headlines. Samuel walked ahead without looking at her, a bundle of ledgers under his arm. The judge called order, his gavel echoing like thunder in the dry air. "Mr. Whitlock, you've requested this hearing to challenge your own family's estate filings. State your claim." Samuel stood straight, calm, every word sharp as a blade. "I'm here to prove that my father acquired certain properties, including the Morales Ranch, through fraudulent means and coercion. He used shell companies to create debts, forcing marriages and land transfers under duress." The room gasped. Eleanor shot up from her seat. "Lies! He's shaming father's name to protect that girl." The judge rapped the gavel again. "You'll speak when called, Mrs. Whitlock." Samuel opened the first ledger, the pages yellow and thin, covered in precise handwriting. "Exhibit A, Whitlock Holdings and Water Company, a front for my father's railroad expansion. It bought out ranch wells across the territory, including the Morales line. Debts were engineered, interest rates impossible, payments forged." He lifted another page, showing signatures. "My father created the problem, then offered a solution: marriage." The courtroom fell silent except for the rustle of papers. Anna sat frozen, heart pounding as she watched townsmen who once mocked her now shift uncomfortably. Eleanor leaned forward, voice trembling with fury. "You can't prove intent!" Samuel met her glare. "Intent is written on every line of these books." The judge motioned for the documents, reading in silence for what felt like hours. Finally, he looked up. "If this is true, it changes everything. Mrs. Whitlock," he turned toward Anna, "you were coerced, not complicit. You will face no further investigation." Gasps broke the quiet. Anna's throat tightened. She hadn't realized how deeply she'd been holding her breath until that moment. Eleanor's lawyer rose in protest, but the judge cut him off. The hearing is adjourned. The ledgers stand as evidence. His gavel struck, final as a gunshot. Outside, sunlight poured over the courthouse steps, blinding after the dim interior. Anna stopped halfway down, staring at the sky as if seeing it for the first time since her wedding. Samuel joined her, the wind tugging at his coat. "They'll hate me for this," he said softly. "They already do." She turned to him, voice steady. "Then we're even." For the first time he smiled. Not out of victory, but release. Down the street, a paperboy shouted the next edition of the Santa Fe Gazette, headlines flapping in the wind. Anna didn't need to read it. She could feel the story changing already. By dawn the next day, the Whitlock estate was under siege, not by lawmen, but by gossip. The morning papers screamed betrayal. "Son denounces his own blood. Widow's lies divide the Whitlocks." Eleanor fed every headline herself, sitting by the telephone dictating to editors who owed her favors. When Anna walked through the market that afternoon, people stopped pretending not to stare. A butcher who had once tipped his hat turned away. A dressmaker whispered, "Heard she's got the sun under her spell now." Even the preacher crossed the street. The humiliation burned, but it wasn't what broke her. It was realizing how quickly truth could be drowned by wealth and rumor. At the mansion, Samuel faced the full fury of his siblings. "You've disgraced us," one brother shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "You've destroyed Father's name for that girl's." Eleanor, eyes sharp with triumph, added, "And what's she done for you, Samuel, besides ruin your career and your bloodline?" He stood calm amid their storm, though the vein in his jaw pulsed. "Father ruined himself," he said. "I just stopped pretending otherwise." Eleanor laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "Then live with your new wife's pity, because after tonight you'll have nothing left but her." She threw a bundle of papers at his chest, his name stripped from every trust, his accounts frozen, his law firm partnership dissolved by letter of family vote. He caught the papers without flinching. "Then I'm free," he said quietly. That silence that followed was heavier than anger. Outside the window, the sky darkened with a sudden desert storm. Wind slapped the shutters, thunder rolling like judgment. Anna waited by the carriage, clutching the small trunk she'd packed before the hearing. When Samuel stepped outside, rain already falling, she saw the resignation in his eyes, but not regret. "You don't have to come," he said. "It's my fight." She shook her head. "No, it was my debt. Now it's our start." They climbed into the carriage as lightning cracked across the valley. Behind them, Eleanor stood in the doorway, shouting something lost in the storm. The wheels splashed through puddles, mud spraying, horses straining against the wind. Santa Fe blurred behind them, its lights fading into the kind of darkness that feels like freedom. Samuel looked at her, rain streaking his face. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Home," she said. "If I still have one." He smiled faintly. "Then that's where I'll take you." The carriage rattled on through the night, the rain washing the last trace of the Whitlocks from their clothes, from their names, from their lives. By the time the storm cleared, the carriage wheels were caked with red clay, and the horizon stretched open into a silence Anna hadn't heard in months. The Morales land appeared like a ghost through the mist, half-fallen fences, a barn leaning under its own weight, fields that once bloomed now overrun by weeds. Samuel helped her down, the ground soft beneath their boots, the air heavy with the smell of wet mesquite. It's smaller than I imagined, he said quietly. It used to feel endless, she replied, brushing her skirt free of dust. The front door hung crooked, creaking when she pushed it open. Inside, everything smelled of memory. Old cedar, candle wax, and something faintly sweet, like her mother's perfume lingering years after Hope had left. She found the table where her father once spread the ledgers, the same ones that had doomed them. "This is where he wrote the note that sold me," she said softly. Samuel didn't speak. He just watched her trace the grooves in the wood with her fingertips, every scar a story she hadn't chosen to tell. Outside, the creek still ran shallow but alive, threading through the property like a stubborn pulse. She walked toward it, Samuel following a few steps behind. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly, stopping at the bank. "You could have walked away." He hesitated, his voice low. "Because when I read those ledgers, I saw myself in them, someone trying to build a life out of someone else's pain." Anna looked up, the late light catching in her eyes. "You're nothing like him." "I was," he said, "until you made me want to stop being." They stood in the hush that follows confession. The water glinting with the reflection of a fading sun. The quiet between them wasn't empty. It was full of things too fragile to name. "You'll lose everything," she whispered. "I already have," he answered, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Now I get to choose what's worth keeping." For the first time, Anna let herself laugh, small and real. "Then start with a fence post," she said, nodding to the fallen corral. "If we're to survive here, it'll be with our own hands, not his money." He rolled up his sleeves and joined her without another word. As they worked, the sound of hammers and splashing water rose into the twilight, a rhythm of rebuilding, not escape. When the stars appeared, the house behind them glowed dimly from the light of a single lantern, 2 silhouettes moving inside. Neither rescuer nor rescued. Neither master nor widow, just 2 souls finally earning their quiet. They had barely fixed the roof when the riders came. 3 deputies, a lawyer, and a wagon with the Whitlock crest painted in gold. Dust rose behind them like judgment. Samuel stepped off the porch before they dismounted, the noon sun cutting hard lines across his face. "You're trespassing on property now under dispute," the lead deputy said, reading from a folded document. Anna came forward, her dress still damp from washing, her palms raw from work. "That's my land," she said. "Paid for once by my father's sweat, and again by my own." The lawyer, a man too polished for dust roads, smirked. "Your ownership is contested, Mrs. Whitlock. The family is appealing the ruling. Until resolved, this property reverts to estate custody." Samuel's voice was calm, but iron beneath it. The ruling was final. "You're standing here because Eleanor can't live without someone to punish." The lawyer's expression flickered. "You should know, Mr. Whitlock. The papers are calling you complicit. Fraud by omission. You'll be summoned next." The deputies waited, hands near their holsters, but Samuel didn't move. "Then summon me," he said. "I've stopped running from my name." The lawyer turned his gaze toward Anna. "You could save yourself, Mrs. Whitlock. Return to Santa Fe, sign the deed over, and the family will drop their suit." She looked past him toward the hills shimmering in the heat. "And if I don't?" "Then they'll bury you under debt again." Anna smiled faintly, a kind of tired grace in her eyes. They already tried that once. The lawyer stiffened, gestured to his men, and rode off without another word. The dust they left behind settled slowly over the fence posts Samuel had fixed the night before, as if the desert itself refused to forget. When the sound of hooves faded, Anna turned to him. "They won't stop." "Neither will you," he said. She exhaled, looking toward the town's distant line of roofs. They'll drag me into that courtroom again. Samuel nodded. Then we'll walk in together. That evening, the sky turned the color of rust, the air dry and electric with promise. As they sat on the porch, Samuel read through the papers left behind by the lawyer. New petitions, new lies. Anna watched him quietly, then said, "They think all I ever wanted was land." He looked up, the faintest smile ghosting his mouth. "What do you want then?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "To live a day without owing anyone anything." He folded the papers, his gaze steady. "Then let's start tomorrow." Somewhere in the distance, a train whistled. Lonely, relentless, the sound of progress and destruction all at once. But neither of them turned to watch it pass. The courthouse was fuller than it had been even for the first hearing. Farmers, merchants, and housewives pressed against the walls, hungry for drama dressed as justice. Anna entered on Samuel's arm, plain cotton dress, no jewelry, no veil of widowhood, just the face of a woman who had run out of fear to spend. Eleanor sat near the front with her lawyer, her smile poised like a blade, every curl of her hair deliberate, every whisper rehearsed. "They say she bewitched him," someone murmured as Anna passed. "No," another voice said. "She just didn't stay quiet." The judge rapped his gavel, eyes already weary. "We are here to address the appeal filed by the Whitlock estate." Eleanor's lawyer stood, polished and smooth, spinning words into suspicion. "Your Honor, this woman's claim rests on coercion and the testimony of a disowned son with much to gain. The Whitlock legacy must not be undermined by gossip and guilt." Samuel rose before the lawyer could finish, his tone sharp but calm. "Legacy isn't truth," he said, "and if our family's name can't survive honesty, then it deserves to die." Murmurs swelled. The judge frowned, motioning him forward. "Mr. Whitlock, do you bring evidence?" "No," Samuel said, "just conscience. My father's records already told the story. This hearing isn't about proof, it's about pride." He stepped aside, and the room's attention fell on Anna. She didn't need to be called. She walked to the stand on her own. "They call me a schemer," she began, voice steady, "because a rich man chose to die in my presence. They call me a thief because I refused to give up the only thing that was ever mine, my name. I was poor when I met Henry Whitlock, and I'll die poor again if it means I keep my dignity." Her words hung in the stillness like the final notes of a hymn. The judge leaned forward. "And what do you seek, Mrs. Whitlock?" "Nothing that isn't already mine," she said, "and nothing that isn't his." Samuel's eyes softened. Eleanor's hand tightened around her pearls. The judge sat back, thinking. "The appeal is denied. The Morales property stands in Mrs. Whitlock's name, free of claim." Gasps, whispers, a few claps quickly silenced. Eleanor rose, face pale as parchment. "You'll regret this," she spat. "Maybe," Anna said quietly, "but not tonight." She turned and walked down the aisle, Samuel at her side, sunlight spilling through the courthouse doors like forgiveness. Outside, the crowd parted without words. The same people who'd watched her fall now stepped aside to watch her walk free. Samuel looked down at her, half smiling. "You just buried a dynasty." Anna shook her head. "No, I just stopped kneeling to one." And for the first time since leaving her mother's ranch, she felt the wind on her face as something clean. Not carrying dust or debt, but promise. The courthouse had emptied, but the noise of it clung to Anna's thoughts long after the doors shut behind her. The next morning she stood at the edge of the Santa Fe Plaza, while people passed pretending not to recognize her, their glances betraying the quiet awe that follows a woman who has survived both ruin and victory. In her hands, she held a small envelope. The the transfer papers Samuel had prepared, granting her the full rights to the Whitlock trust her late husband had left. She could have kept it all, the lawyers said. Land, rail shares, townhouses, a fortune big enough to buy silence for life. But when Samuel found her by the well outside the courthouse, she was already sealing the envelope shut. "You're sending it back," he said, reading her face. "All but the Morales homestead," she replied. "That's enough for me." He frowned slightly. "You earned more than that." She looked up at him, sunlight catching in her eyes. "I didn't earn any of it. I endured it. That's not the same thing." He tried to argue, but she shook her head. "You taught me to tell the truth. Now let me live it." Together they walked to the bank, where she signed away everything except the small tract of land that had once been her father's. The clerk stared as she slid the papers across the counter. "You sure, ma'am? That's a fortune." "No," she said quietly. "That was a prison." When they stepped outside, the noon wind smelled of rain, heavy with renewal. Samuel stopped beside her. "You could have stayed in Santa Fe," he said, "with comfort, with name, with safety." She smiled faintly. All that did was hide the loneliness. He studied her, the corner of his mouth softening. "You know, most people think love begins with rescue." "Most people are wrong," she said. "It begins when no one owns the other." They started toward the road, the same one that led back to her land. As they passed the old telegraph office, Samuel noticed a crowd inside reading the morning paper. Her name again, this time not in scandal but in admiration. "Widow returns inheritance, keeps only her honor." He paused, but Anna didn't. "Let them write what they want," she called over her shoulder. "I'm done living in other people's stories." The carriage waited ahead, the same one that had brought her here as a bride, now carrying them both as equals. Samuel took the reins, his hands sure but unhurried. "And what story will we live now?" he asked. Anna looked out at the open road, the hills rising gold beyond the city. "One that doesn't need witnesses," she said. The horses started forward, their hooves steady on the earth that had cost her everything, and finally, given it all back. The sky over Santa Fe burned pale gold as dawn crept across the rooftops, washing the city clean for people who could still afford to forget. Anna and Samuel stood at the edge of the road where the desert began, a single wagon waiting. No fine horses, no servants, only 2 packed trunks, and the clothes on their backs. Behind them, the bells of the mission tolled low, marking an hour neither of them owed to anyone. Samuel climbed up first, then offered his hand, and Anna took it without hesitation. The wood was warm beneath her palm. The gesture was quiet, unceremonial. No promise, no rescue, just choice. When the wheels began to turn, the city fell away, brick by brick, until only the desert remained, miles of open land shimmering with the heat of a coming summer. For the first time in months, Anna didn't feel watched. They passed the railroad line, where men were already laying new steel, their hammers rising and falling like heartbeats. One of them tipped his hat. Samuel returned the gesture. "You could have stayed," he said softly, eyes on the horizon. "Your name finally means something good here." Anna shook her head. "Names change. Land stays." She turned to look back one last time. The city was a blur now, its noise swallowed by distance. "I don't hate it," she said. "I just don't belong to it." Samuel smiled faintly. "Then let's belong nowhere together." They rode for hours without speaking, the road winding through stretches of mesquite and cottonwood until the creek shimmered into view, the same ribbon of water that had once bordered her father's fence. The house stood waiting, sunlit and imperfect, but alive. Samuel stopped the wagon. "Home," he said simply. Anna stepped down, the dust rising around her boots like blessing instead of curse. The wind carried the scent of sage and wild grass. A hawk circled above, calling into the silence. She closed her eyes and breathed. "It's strange," she whispered. "I thought freedom would feel louder." "No," Samuel said. "It just feels earned." They walked side by side towards the porch, where shadows stretched long and kind. The day settled over them, patient and forgiving. The kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It just stays. As the sun climbed higher, the last train whistle from Santa Fe echoed faint and distant, fading into wind and horizon, leaving only the sound of two people building the rest of their lives from nothing but truth. She was sold to save her mother's land, but in the end, she bought back her own life. If freedom came at this price, would you have paid it too? Tell me in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind.